In this video, I'm going over one commonly made mistake for every agent. Some of these will seem like common knowledge, but somehow people still make them, while some are more advanced and can really improve your gameplay with that agent. So let's get right into it. Starting off with chamber, we have a chamber mistake that I see chamber players of all ranks make, and this mistake is forgetting to use their traps. This probably sounds very basic, but you'd be shocked to see how many people do this even in the highest of ranks. In pretty much every other game I get into, I have a chamber that uses their traps wrong or just flat out doesn't use them at all until someone asks for it. And mind you, I'm immortal, so I can only imagine how bad it is in the lower ranks. You want to make sure to use your trap every round without your team having to ask for it. The trap is in my opinion the strongest part of chamber's kit, as it can even hold sites by itself, such as on B Haven, so don't forget to use it. Without a doubt, the most common Reyna mistake I see is not using dismiss often enough. You want to dismiss after the majority of kills you get, which is not what most players do. Unless you're sure that no one will peek you, using Devour is rarely worth the risk. Devour can seem like it has more value, but using it you also take the unnecessary risk of dying, since it's pretty likely that someone peeks you. I'd also like to add that instantly using your ability is another common mistake. I'd rather see you insta-dismiss than insta-heal, but even that isn't always necessary. This is of course very context dependent, and sometimes you are in danger so you have to use it instantly, but keep in mind that you do have a few seconds to make that choice. A mistake I myself made a lot playing Omen in my early days of Valorant was using my ult to get behind enemies far too often. I know this seems like the best way to use your ult, and that's because you have the chance of getting multiple kills, but with the increase of sentinels having traps, as well as the fact that most people are ready for this when they hear the Omen ult, it's usually not worth it. I'd always recommend using your ult to get some guaranteed value out of it instead of taking a big risk that might pay off. Ulting to grab the spike, fake a rotate, or getting some info are some easy ways that are a lot better and safer than trying to get the flank. The by far most common mistake I see Jett players make is being afraid of dying. Now you might think dying is something that you should be afraid of, but that's not really true when you're a duelist. Because your job is to create space and get entry frags, you should not necessarily want to die, but at least be willing to. This is because if you've used your abilities to entry and to create space, then you don't really have much value after that compared to someone like a controller or a sentinel that can block off angles, molly the spike, etc. So focus on getting first bloods and don't be afraid of dying a lot as long as you're doing your job. A common mistake Brim players make has to do with their ult. Some people hold on to it for way too long, hoping for the perfect moment where they can get an ace or kill the diffuser, while others use it way too casually. Brim's ult is best used for making space and getting a free kill. Yeah, it can definitely be very useful in a post plant, but you don't want to hold on to it hoping that you're alive in a post plant and can get maximum value out of it. A really great way of using it is for example ulting lamps on bind to allow your team to entry or to get a free kill. Even if this doesn't get you a lot of kills, sometimes 0 kills, the space you're creating is still worth it. There are many other ways the ult can be used, but communicating with your team when you have it to try to take as much space as possible is always a good idea. Since Skye is an initiator, it's very easy to always play her that way, but not experimenting with more of a duelist type of playstyle using Skye is definitely a mistake. If you notice that your duelists maybe aren't doing their job that well, then don't hesitate to try taking the duelist role. I'd always let a good duelist go first, but if that isn't working, then Skye can definitely work well. Considering her flashes are pretty much impossible to counter if you use them correctly, she can make a deadly entry fragger. The mistake for Astra is not recalling your stars when rotating. This is something that can be easily forgotten about, and is an especially big problem with low ranked Astras. It's something very simple that can play a big role in the outcome of a round, considering how powerful the stars are for retakes. So when you're sure that the enemies are on the other side, don't make the mistake of rotating without recalling your stars. Breach is best used in combination with other more mobile agents. Calling when you're about to stun or flash so that your Jett or Neon can dash right in and get some free kills is one of the easiest ways to get the man advantage, and it doesn't take much effort from your side either. The same thing goes for your ult. The more you communicate, the better of a Breach player you'll be. I know it can be tempting to use your stuns for yourself, but they usually bring a lot more value used in combination with other abilities. The mistake I have for Viper is not repositioning often enough as a defender. On maps like Icebox where Viper is very strong, chances are that enemies will try to avoid pushing the site you're holding if they know where you are. And that's when you want to utilize repositioning, so that you're not only holding one site for the entire half. Starting off on B is probably a good idea, since it's where you're the best, but if the enemies haven't went B in a few rounds, then don't be afraid of switching to surprise them. This is also good to do when you have your ult, as it's probably better used on A. Cypher is an agent whose utility is easily countered if it's predictable, but it can be some of the best and most annoying util if it's not. So your job as a Cypher is to always keep the enemies on their toes, not wanting to push in, since they don't know where your traps are. Try to have a good amount of setups for each map and alternate between them so that the enemies can't find a pattern. This is one of the best and most annoying ways to play Cypher, and is the reason why a good Cypher is the only agent I really hate playing against. A big mistake KO players make is not mixing up the way that they're using their knife. Knifing for info is great, and so is knifing when the enemies are pushing, but always doing one of the two isn't optimal. I think knifing for info is the more powerful one of the two, but you don't always want to throw it in the same place, and especially not at the same time. This is less of an issue if you're low ranked, but for someone who's above plat or so, if you're currently always using your knife on one spot at the start of the round, try maybe waiting 5 seconds and then knifing. A lot of times the attackers will wait for the knife before they push, so if you're waiting a bit longer than usual, maybe they think that you're on the other side, they push, and then you get the knife and get all the info. For some knife lineups, this doesn't work as well as the enemies will have ran past it by then, but switching up the timings of your knife is a really powerful trick. Your res is a very powerful ability with many ways of using it, but the most common way people use it is by simply resing a dead teammate. This is of course a very good way to use it, but don't be afraid of resing someone at the end of a round to improve your team's economy. Maybe you've had a few failed attempts of resing someone and your team's economy is now pretty bad. Then it's not a bad idea to simply use your res to get an additional gun. This gives you guaranteed value and can sometimes be better than waiting for the perfect res. Phoenix is a very straightforward agent to play, but the most common mistake I see happen is Phoenix mains team flashing. Because of the fact that Phoenix flashes don't go very far at all, it's very easy to accidentally flash your team. A simple solution to this is always calling before you flash, or making sure that no teammate is looking that way. This is a very simple fix to a common problem, so I thought I'd give you an additional tip. And that additional tip is to jump and flash over boxes when you can. Like I said, Phoenix flashes don't go very far, but they have the advantage of being able to flash over things. So if you're suspecting that an enemy is hiding behind a box, try to flash over it and maybe you get a free kill. A mistake Yoru players make is not taking advantage of the shorty, especially when ulting. Because of how close up to someone you can get when ulting, and even by simply using the teleport ability, buying a cheap shorty can give you an easy free kill and weapon. This is a great trick to use on ecos, but even on buy rounds if you want to save some money or purchase a gun for one of your teammates. Most Killjoy players take advantage of setups to get as much out of their utility as possible, and that's definitely something you want to do, but a lot of people take it too far and instantly use all of their abilities in the same way every single round without any info. This is not only predictable since the enemies will get used to it, but it will also have you waste some of your abilities since you can't recall everything when you have to rotate. An easy fix to this is using some of your abilities that can gather info, and then when you have that info you can throw down the rest, such as your mollies, when you actually know that the enemies are pushing your sites. Neon can be a really strong duelist in the right hands, but a common mistake I see is players only using her wall to run through as a way of entering. This is something that you can do every now and again, but there are a lot more ways of using her wall. A good example of using it is sort of like a Viper wall to block off angles. This is really strong because it reaches very far unlike Phoenix wall and can be used on the fly, which Vipers can't. The biggest mistake you can make as a Raze is not taking advantage of your blast packs. The most obvious thing would be not knowing how to double satchel, so if you haven't learned that yet, then that should definitely be your first priority. But something that's more overlooked is using her blast packs to throw off the enemy's aim, either by hitting them with it, or by giving yourself a little boost to the side. I'm not talking about a traditional go flying type of satchel, but instead just barely hitting yourself so that you move horizontally, sort of like a neon sprint. This works well, especially if you're predicting that someone is holding the angle tightly or with an up. This mistake might sound basic, but it's failing to use your drone when pushing somewhere. If your team has decided to take over a site, then you should instantly drone so that the first angles are clear from operators and to give your team early info. But this is where many players go wrong. Even immortal Sovas fail to drone all the time, and it's really not something your team should have to ask for every single round. Fade is an agent that can very easily get a lot of information, but the trick here is knowing what to do with that info. And that's where a lot of Fade players go wrong. Without the help from your teammates, your abilities and the info you get is almost worthless. That's why it's crucial to communicate with your teammates and make sure that they're ready to follow up on that information. For example, if you catch someone with your Seize ability, it's gonna do nothing unless you either hunt them down or throw a molly or a nade at them, so don't miss out on taking advantage of the info you're getting. Now that you know one tip for every agent, check out my one tip for every weapon video that's on the screen right now. See you there.